Welcome to the Extraordinary Lives podcast, where we talk about lives that go beyond the ordinary to the extraordinary, with the extra being Jesus. We'll be encouraged with amazing stories and helpful insights from the lives of ordinary people who have that extra, that supernatural difference that only Jesus can give. I'm your host, Ellen Bennett. Thanks for joining us. Hi, I am so glad you could be with us today as we interview my amazing mom, Linda Warner. Of course, first we probably need to talk about how wonderful I am and just what a great job you did of raising me.
Yes.
All right, so first tell me a little bit about your background. We'll be talking about the difference Jesus has made in your life, but where did you grow up? What kind of church did you go to, if any? And just give us a little bit of information about your spiritual journey.
Okay. I was born in Charleston, South Carolina, because my dad worked in the naval shipyards at that time during the 40s. But when he went off to war, my mom and I moved to Bristol, Tennessee to live with my grandparents. And as things worked out, I continued to live with my mom, and I continued to live with my grandparents until I married. But I went to high school in Bristol.
And I do need to mention you were homecoming queen.
Yes, I was homecoming queen. I was very lucky. And in high school, I had a wonderful junior and senior year. I was very active and very busy, and I've always seemed to want to be involved in a lot of different things going on around me. So
I do need to ask you, you were raised without a dad. What happened with that?
Well, my dad went off to war, but he didn't die in the war, but he didn't come back home to my mom and I. We were living with my grandparents, and my mom didn't get letters from him. She started trying to find out where he was and what was going on. And when the war ended, somehow or another she was walking somewhere and met someone, and they said they had seen my dad in his hometown in a town in southwestern Virginia. So she hired someone, she didn't drive at that time, to take her over there. And sure enough, he was living with his parents, but he had not told her that he was back in the States. He just didn't want the responsibility after that. But my mom decided that, in fact, that's a part I don't remember what happened, but I do know that one day there was a knock on the house where we were living, and someone presented divorce papers to my mom. He had divorced her through a newspaper. At that time, you could run an article or something in a small place. So she was served the divorce papers, but she decided she wasn't going to let him get off scot-free, so she did ask that he, do financial support. And I don't think he ever paid anything. His parents paid me until I was 18. And I dearly loved his mom and dad. I used to go spend summers with them, and my mom never talked down about my dad. She tried to explain things to me because I couldn't understand as a small child why he didn't come back to us, or why he didn't love me, or he didn't write or send things. I was so grateful later to learn that we did live with my grandparents, because later in life I discovered that he was bipolar, and that God had richly blessed us to having lived with my grandparents, who were very strong Christians, very involved in the church. I was raised in a Baptist church, and from the time I was very little, when the doors opened, we were there. My granddad was the deacon, and all of my other family and people were involved in that. So I think I had a rich heritage in that fact, and was very grateful later on that I wasn't with my dad, because I think had my mom and I been with him, it would have been a terrible childhood and a terrible life living with someone like that. So I learned at an early age to really depend upon God and to ask him for things and to pray to him, because I was raised in that way.
Wow, that's great. That does sound like a major way that God was really working in your life to protect you, and I'm so grateful for that too. And just for how you raised me in such a loving home. I always felt that unconditional love, and also from your mom and my great-grandmother, Guinea. And also, you raised me with good discipline and good values as well. So I appreciate that too. So what happened with meeting my dad, getting married? Tell us a little bit about married life.
I had 1 year of college, and then I really didn't know what I wanted to do, so I went to a commercial business school. And during the summer, I was working at an office, and there was a guy working there who was very attractive, and I just was sort of in awe of him. He was several years older than me, and I heard and I found out that his wife had died, and he had 2 children, and he was raising these 2 children. So at some point, maybe right before Christmas or something, our office was having a Christmas party, and he asked me to go with him. And my mother said I kept coming home and talking about Mr. Blue. I was fascinated by him or whatever. But I was only 20 years old, and here was a person who not only he was 11 years older than me, but he had 2 children, and he was a Christian Zionist. And I was raised in the Baptist background. But there were different things about him, and my family really liked him, and I didn't seem to think that was going to be any problem. Little did I know that being 20 years old and a child 4 and 6 is quite a challenge and everything. I think I was so young and so naive that didn't seem to bother me. And when I married your dad, I was like a child with children, and we just did things together, and I was green about cooking and doing all things like that, but we just sort of grew together, I think. And then 2.5 years later, you were born, and we always felt like that sort of connected our family. You were the one who sort of came in, and everybody loved you. The other children loved you. But when your dad decided to go into business for himself, and we lived in Bristol, but he moved to Memphis, Tennessee, and opened a business. And that was a very challenging time, having moved there, him starting a new business with a wife and 3 children. That was in 1967. I think if you tried to do that nowadays, it would be very, very hard. But we accepted the challenge and moved there. And I had gone to the Baptist church, and I was taking you with me, and he was going and taking the other 2 children, Lynn and Char, your brother and sister, and to his church. And when we moved to Memphis, we only had 1 car. We were having some marital problems even then. I mean, there were just different things going on. So I decided that if we could go to church together, that might be better for our marriage and everything. So I started going to the Christian Science Church with him. And I don't regret that time, because I feel like I learned a lot. A lot of Christian Science emphasis is very strong on God. And so I feel like I learned a lot during that time, and learned to depend upon God even more during that time.
Great. And I remember just the people were wonderful. Loved the people there, very supportive, encouraging. And I do have to give a shout out to my sister and brother, Lynn and Char, who are also awesome, and I love having them as my brother and sister, and I love that you just always raised us as one family. It was never that they had a different mom. It was just we were all one family, and that was really great.
It really was. I have to tell a cute little story on Ellen. Her dad and I were celebrating our 10th wedding anniversary. Can I tell that?
Yes.
And Ellen had been up with some children playing and everything, and all of a sudden, I'd never told her that there was a different mom. And she came in, you were probably maybe 8 at that time somewhere, and she came in and she said, well, how can you be married 10 years when Lynn is 16 years old? And I thought, okay, here's the opportunity to tell you and to go into, what our background was and all. And so after that, I think you questioned your dad a lot about Evelyn, his first wife, and Lynn and Char's mother. But one night I was putting you to bed, and you'd been misbehaving a little bit or something like that. And you said to me, Well, she says, you're not going to punish me like you do Lynn and Char because I'm your real daughter. And I don't know why, but God led me to say this. You know what? I don't want to ever hear you say anything like that again, because they have 2.5 years on you before you came into the world. And you never, ever said anything more about that after that.
Mm-hmm. All right. You got my number there. Good.
Yeah.
So you alluded to the fact that later Christian Science did become more of an issue with you, mm-hmm. and even maybe a little dangerous. Tell us what happened.
Well, as everyone knows, the thought about Christian Science is that you don't go to doctors, and we did have a lot of wonderful experiences. In Christian Science, the first thing you do is you depend upon God wholeheartedly. And then also, for your healing and different things like that. But there was a time, I don't remember exactly how old I was. I think you might have been in high school. And I had a problem with a place on my neck. And I just couldn't get it to be healed and everything. And finally, it got bad. And I called the oldest daughter, Lynn, was dating a guy at that time who was a doctor, and you had to have a doctor admit you to the hospital. And so I went into the hospital not knowing exactly what was wrong. And your dad was supportive of that. There wasn't any problem or anything about that. And when I got in there, I had evidently an abscess in my neck somewhere back in there. Don't even remember what caused it or what the problem was. But he had said that had I not come in, that might have gone through my body, and that it was good that I had come in when I did.
I do just want to express, too, that I remember you lying in bed, and I would say that abscess was maybe the size of a ping pong ball at least, that mm-hmm. was just sticking out on the side of your neck. And, of course, was very concerning. We didn't know what it was. And the fact that you did decide to go to the hospital, that you were able to get admitted, because things were different back mm-hmm. then, that Lynn, my sister, was dating Chris, and his dad was a doctor. That is just, I think, a great God experience, too.
God thing.
Yes, and I definitely look to that in my life and your life as just being so grateful that God spared you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that shook my thought and everything about how far I could go with Christian Science, or how far I wanted to go, or how far I wanted to. And fortunately, as my children were being raised, I don't ever remember us having any really strong physical problems. Do you?
I just remember once, I think you thought that I had the mumps.
Yes.
And my temperature was really high. Mm-hmm. But blessedly, I'll say, my temperature came down and I was mm-hmm. okay. But I know at that point you thought about putting me into a cold bathtub mm-hmm. to try to bring my fever down.
Right. So I've always, from the time I was a small child, really felt strongly about God in my life and looking to Him for direction and all. And I just felt like I could no longer stay where I was, and I started searching again. Through a series of events and different things like that, I found my way into the Methodist Church, and I've been very grateful to be there.
So another dangerous experience, you live a dangerous life, Mom, is you actually had a stalker in your life at one time. And we were very nervous about this man. And I just look back on that and see so many times where God protected you, put people in your life who would actually help, even though it would have been dangerous for them as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, after I divorced from your dad, I moved to Knoxville, Tennessee. My mom and grandmother and them were still in Bristol. I didn't want to go back to Bristol, but Knoxville, I felt like I could make a living in Knoxville. And down through the years, I think after you were in college or something like that, I became very involved in interior design, and didn't really get a degree, but so many different areas I worked in, I eventually became grandfathered in the state of Tennessee and got my license. But before that, I had moved here and was involved with someone and did not realize that person, what the problems were. That person really turned out to be bipolar, and I didn't realize a lot of those things like that. But one of the things that happened because he was stalking, I was living in a place and they sent me to someone, and I talked to someone. But then I went to see my doctor, and my doctor sent me to a psychologist. And I was telling her about the problems, and she instantly recognized what the problem was with him. I felt like that was God directed, because that really saved my life, because I didn't know what to do before then, but because she recognized what the problems were, it directed me in many ways. The things that I did after that helped me. I was able to get an order of protection, and then when things would happen, because those kind of people do not recognize the law. They're going to go ahead and do what they want. I've discovered that really means nothing to that person. They're determined, and they're going to find a way, to get back to you. The county police department in the city, because Knoxville is based in county and city, because you had that order of protection, were always there to help me. And many times, in whatever the situations were, I was just praying to God the whole time. And there was a scripture at that time. Can I read that?
Mm-hmm.
Because I felt, you feel your life is in danger, but at the same time, you look to God for your protection, because you know that that's the only place you can turn to at that time, because so many things weren't working and weren't going to be. And I love the 91st Psalm. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. Surely He will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. You will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday. And this one other part, if you make the Most High your dwelling, even the Lord, who is my refuge, then no harm will befall you, no disaster will come near your tent.
Wow. What were some things that He did, and some ways that you saw God protect you?
It was very interesting, because He went after people all around me. He threw a rock. I was living in an apartment. He threw a rock through the person next door to me, through her sliding glass window, because he thought I had gone there and I was living with her. And then the people who had rented me the apartment, this was probably a scary thing. I did know that he had guns, and he had shot through the windshield of the person who was the manager of the apartment complex.
Wow.
Because they were also trying to protect me and all. He would show up at work. I remember one day being in the bank, and all of a sudden I turned around and he was right behind me. And I learned at that time to start looking and to be aware of your surroundings. I hadn't really paid much attention before that, but you learn to do that. And I had so many people who stepped in, and I was working at that time, and when I would leave from work, they would follow me, and I would have to go different ways, because I had checked into a different place to live to get away from him. And having never been through an experience like that before, you don't realize what people are capable of. But then one day I came out and found a note on my car. He knew that I was somewhere, but he had left a note on my car. And it said, I'm going to play tennis in Hilton Head or something, and I want you to come with me. And it was just like such a turnabout that he thinks that I would go with him after he had done all these things,
Right.
It's such a crazy personality and person to deal with. Because he, being bipolar, he eventually wound up in the penal farm here in Knoxville, because he had a DUI. And I think that was the beginning of, there for a while I was afraid to get out and go different places. But then when I knew he was in the penal farm, I was able to start going back and going to church and getting involved in all of that here. I also say I have to be very grateful for my children and my mother and everybody who kept in touch with me all during this time. I feel like they did a lot to save me too.
Yes, I definitely remember those times and being scared for you, and he would call us and just talk for long lengths. I remember once we were visiting, and Steve, my husband, was just so good about engaging him and listening, so to kind of protect me from having to do that. And I had a Holy Spirit moment, I will call it, when I just had this thought that you thought, oh, I have to stay with him because, I've been with him for so long, that would be the right thing to do. And I just had this thought that I truly believe was from God to just tell you, look, you do not have to stay with him. God loves you and you have the freedom to leave. This is not a good situation.
I became very strong after that and was able to just take each day and not give in to anything or whatever.
That truly is amazing to me, to be that strong and to see just how God gave you that faith and that trust in him, and that you were strong enough to get out of that situation as well.
I do want to say one thing is I was feeling so guilty, being in that situation and all like that, and was feeling a little ways away from God at that time. And I felt like I had walked away from God, not that God had walked away from me. So I do think that coming out of that, I was fearful of what God would think of me, what my children and different people and everything like that. But I do think I felt guilty and carried a lot of that because sometimes, bringing up, you've heard the thing, you make your bed and you lie in it, and sort of, I felt like I'd got myself in that position and I just had to deal with it. But as I was coming out of that, I just became stronger and stronger, and relying more on God during at that point too, because that's all I could do. I knew at that point in my life that there was nothing I could do, that God would help me, whether if I went to the courts or different things, try to get the order of protection and different things that happened. I felt God through all of that, but still I had a long time forgiving myself from a lot of different things like that. And as you talk about the walk with God, I think about, they talk about the road is narrow and straight and narrow. But I think that God gives you these opportunities. If you go off the road a little bit, that road has a path that brings you back to that road. And down through my whole life, I feel like I've gone off a little bit and come back and found my way, and have been very grateful to know that that's the humanness of us. We're not perfect in that sense, but God realized that we are human, and if we stray off a little bit or get away off a little bit, he makes a way for us to come back into his fold. He is our shepherd, and he is guiding and leading us.
That's great. I'm glad you brought that up. I remember just hearing in your voice kind of that feeling of guilt for a while, and just so wanting you to feel that freedom and love in Christ. And you're right. We are all sinners, or we all want to go our own way off the path that God knows is best for us. And yet he loves us, and that's even why he came. Right? He didn't come because we were already perfect. He came to die for us so that we could have that relationship with God, that he could pay the penalty for us. And actually, we receive his very righteousness, which is crazy to think about, but and hard to comprehend. But I've been reading a book called Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland, and he keeps emphasizing how Jesus is that high priest who can identify with our temptations and with our sin, not because Jesus was sinful, but because he experienced all that temptation and was able to overcome it. But he can identify with the pull that we have, and he also has that desire that we come back to him, that when we do, he is always going to be welcoming to us. He's going to be gentle. He's going to be humble with us. And he's not ever thinking, oh, I can't believe you did that. How dare you try to come back to me? Instead, he's wanting to draw us like that good shepherd. He's wanting to draw us back onto the path that's best for us.
And I thought a great deal I could relate to the prodigal son, from leaving and going through different things like that. And also from the fact in the Bible that Jesus came not to the perfect people, but to the people who needed him and who were just the average person. And I think many times in the Old Testament you were expected to be perfect, and you don't have to be that perfect person. And maybe I feel like too that anything and everything I've been through has made me grow. And this particularly made me grow, to depend upon God more and more, and to realize that He was there for you in each and every instance, no matter how small, no matter how big.
That's great. So I am here for a reason here in Knoxville instead of San Diego. Why?
Well, I had to have emergency surgery 5 weeks ago, and I'm so fortunate that the surgery that I had to do with my appendix. My appendix didn't rupture, but it had wrapped itself around a portion of my intestine. But your sister came in the day after my surgery and stayed for 3 weeks, and then you've been here for 2 weeks, and that has been such a gift to have had you all here with me during this time.
So I love the fact that you are a strong woman, and one of the things you did was drive yourself to the emergency room at about 1:30 in the morning. Is that right? You'd been to the doctor earlier that day, and he said, oh, it's just a virus, take some nausea medicine. But that night you did not feel right, and you knew you needed to go to the hospital. So I'm truly grateful for that as well.
Well, it was like early in the morning, and you're thinking, who are you going to call to drive you to the emergency room? And I didn't want to call an ambulance or anything like that. And I thought, I know it's only 10 minutes to the hospital. I know I can make that. So I did. I just drove myself to the emergency room, and as the doctor said, it was a good thing, because then when they did the scan, I did have my surgery like about 12 to 1 o'clock that day.
Wow. All right. And I love your church family. You just have such great people around you from your church, from your friendships here in Knoxville. And I know all of us are so grateful in the family that you have these great friendships. You all really look out after each other.
Right. It's a wonderful church, and we're real involved. During the COVID thing, we had to close the church down, and we couldn't figure out what to do. And someone came up with a blessing box. And the blessing box, plus being able to give meals out once a month, we decided that we could do that. And that has really opened us up into the community. And the community has a couple of banks and then a neighborhood and everything have contributed to our blessing box. And it's really been the thing that we felt like we needed to reach out into the community. But we're a small church, but we're very loving and very giving to each other and there when each other need us to be there.
That's great. I know before COVID, you're on a team called Circle, and I love that really your purpose is to see how you can help others in the community, in the world. I know you've had rummage sales where that goes back to the community. And also, you have housed the homeless at your church.
We had Family Promise. Every 3 months, we would have families come in, and they can only stay in Family Promise for 3 months. And after that, they have to be able to get out, and they're looking for jobs. And it has like a 76% rate of success. It's been very good here in Knoxville. But during COVID, they had to stay at a place. There's a building here in Knoxville where they bought from a church. But we would still take the meals to them when it was our time to do that. So we're hoping that we'll be able to have that again, too. We've had mission projects in Costa Rica and Sudan and different places, but have not been able to do that, during this time. Haven't been able to raise the money from the rummage that we've had that we would give to missions and to local places in the community. So I know that's hurt a lot of different people, so I'll be glad when we can get back into that.
Yes, hopefully that will be soon.
Yes.
I think of James where he says, faith without works is dead.
That's
and it's
right.
not that we have to do works to prove ourselves to God, but it's that because of our faith, because of what Jesus has done for us, we want to reach out to others, and just like he reached out to us. So I love seeing your church just so active in the community, and I love seeing you so active in your church. That's been really sweet and so fun to be able to be around your friends here, go out to dinner with them and lunches as we've been here, and even be invited over for homemade ice cream. Thank you, Betty.
Yes.
Well, Mom, is there anything you want to close out with that we should know?
Yeah. I think I feel very fortunate that I did meet someone again. We had known each other in Memphis, Tennessee. His wife had passed away, and through some interesting things that happened, we were married in 1996, and he was very welcoming to my children and my family, and I was to his. We've had a really wonderful relationship. And he passed away in 2012, but during that time, we only had 15 years together, but during that time, it was just a wonderful gift back to me, to God, and I think to my family. But every morning, while he was in the shower, he would always say the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
That's really sweet. Yes, Fred was so welcoming, so fun. I know all the grandkids just adored him, and that must have been very, very hard when he died so suddenly. And I've been amazed again at your church community coming around you, and then your strength to get through that. We like to call him Freddie Fish.
Yes, he loved all the family. He was very outgoing, and he really just went real suddenly, and that was hard. But as I look back on it, I thought especially during this time, during COVID and everything, he had to be out and around people and doing different things, and that would have been very hard for him. But I think as I go further along, I cherish more and more where God has led me, and to know that each and every day, whatever comes my way, I know that God will help me to go through that day and have what I need for that day. And I really pray for that every day.
Well, I love you, Mom, so much, and you're such a good example to me in your strong faith. So
well, you've been an example to me too, sweetie. You really have.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. This is Ellen Bennett with the Extraordinary Lives podcast.